Well, the state of our nation and the state of our national budget will come centre stage this month. First with the President's Sona address this Thursday and then the Finance Minister's budget speech on the 22nd of February. South Africa, of course, has a mixed economy, which ideally provides a safety net for the vulnerable, but also allows free enterprise. However, with the major problems we are facing, energy, unemployment, inequality, and the tragic reality that children are still dying of malnutrition. Clearly, something in the mix is not working. The SA Federation of Trade Unions, along with other social partners, planning protests around what they believe is an anti-poor approach by government. And I'm joined now by Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. Mr. Vavi, thanks so much for joining us. Government repeatedly says that we have a mixed economy, and that ideally should be the best of the both worlds. So we get all the profits and the taxes from those profits from the private sector. That helps fund the safety net for the poor and the vulnerable. But given that we are still seeing children dying of starvation, something's clearly not working. What is not balanced in the mix, in your view?
Well, what is true, Sally, is that we inherited a mixed economy from the colonial and apartheid era. It had a robust manufacturing sector that was contributing 22% to the GDP. It had functional and robust state-owned enterprises, and over 700 of them, and including it had a railway system that was never adequate to cover for black people as well, but it was at least catering a million and millions of workers. We had a Transnet that was never adequate to cover for a growing economy, but at least it was there. We had a Dinel, we had a SABC, we had an SAA, we had a Petro SA, we had many of these things that underline the fact that we had a mixed economy. But unfortunately, we, under the ANC government, are slowly, at times, fast moving away from that mixed economy, and we are now beginning to center everything around the private sector. That private sector must deliver everything, jobs and the service delivery and so forth. And unfortunately, when the government is making that push, naturally it excludes millions. It is the 12, 13 million South Africans who are unemployed, plus millions other workers who we call underemployed and who are trapped in what we call the precarious kinds of employment, the type of employments that makes workers to borrow money to go to work. And when we are facing that situation, what then follows is not just deepening unemployment, but it is also what makes South Africa to be now the most unequal society in the world. This is what is generating a situation where 1% of the country's population basically owns almost 90% of the country's wealth, and which is totally unsustainable. And this is what we have historically called a ticking time bomb, because you cannot have a country rated the 5th most wealthiest country in the world by the IMF and the Citibank, but having its vast population being categorized as the excluded and or the marginalized majority.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but let's not forget that years of corruption have also hollowed out the system, and that very often has been the private sector hand in hand, corrupt elements in the private sector hand in hand with corrupt elements in government. Are the what you call the neoliberal policies actually to blame, or is it just the actions of corruption which you can find in the private sector or in the public sector? It's pretty undiscriminatory corruption.
The system that the government is embracing uncritically, the market system, is by its nature a place where corruption is the order of the town. It's by its nature breeding corruption because it is based on greed, on survival of the fittest, on me first, to hell with everybody else ideology. It's a dog eat dog out there. And when we have that system, naturally, it will permeate its ethos across all society units, including all political parties. Forget about this thing that the ANC is corrupt, you know. The society is getting more corrupt than it was ever before. People who are bribing traffic officers are not members of the ANC. The unions are battling with crisis of corruption on the part of all of its leaders, from bottom to
some might say
up there. So everybody is battling with that phenomenon of corruption. Yes, that's true.
You know, some might say, unfortunately, that is human nature, that human nature is greedy, and some people, whether they're communists or capitalists, will take advantage of the system unless they are stopped. I want to move on to some of the specific things that you are calling for, because it's quite interesting. You're saying government must not privatise Eskom. However, Eskom has been state-owned for our entire young democracy. And frankly, it's in an absolute mess. 30 years of bad decisions on the part of the state have absolutely contributed to the mess it is in and why we've got where we are. So many South Africans will say, for goodness sake, let's privatise. Maybe they'll do a better job.
Unfortunately, that may be a cry already being made by the likes of the DA and conservatives within the ANC.
But don't they have a point?
No, they don't have a point. The point that they are refusing to make is that if we were to privatize energy in South Africa, and if energy was to join the stable of the private healthcare system, of the private security, private education, private universities, you will then see how what we are seeing under Eskom, this 800% increase in tariffs from 2007 and to date, will look like a Sunday school picnic. You have to look at what is happening in the private clinics and private hospitals to understand that by its nature, the market will never address the most basic needs of the people for education, healthcare, and for energy. So that's why we're opposed to that. Eskom has been hollowed out, in our view, deliberately to prepare it for privatization. The introduction of the independent power producers was meant to do that, because those independent power producers are actually being subsidized by Eskom itself.
All right,
so just to of weakening the position of Eskom so that it can be prepared for privatization.
You're saying basically that this is all a big master plan to force Eskom to the brink of privatization. Other people would look at the situation and say it's government mismanagement and a zero plan that's got Eskom to where it is. Let's just leave that there, because I do want to ask you this question. And this is something that government has said for years they want to do, but they say they just don't have the money, and that's a basic income grant. This 350 Rand a month social relief of distress grant undoubtedly kept some people from starvation, particularly during COVID. It's going to end at the end of March. You're saying, come on, we've got to make this happen, 1,500 Rand a month for the very poor. It needs to happen. You know, everyone would like to see that, frankly. The thought of people starving to death is utterly horrific. The plan is to tax the rich, but a specific focus on corporations. And I think you make an interesting point. You say that if we halted profit shifting by transnational corporations, we could raise 100 billion Rand a year. Now, that sounds like a good plan. How then do you square the issue of we desperately need foreign investment, we desperately need money coming into our country to create more companies, to build more jobs? How do you do that without putting off potential investors? Is there a way?
Firstly, on the first point which you are raising, which is correct, that the government initially had planned that the 350,000 special grants will come to an end in March of 2023. But we've listened to the Minister of Finance, Mr. Inequality, making a concession that as a politician and as a governing party interested to retain its position as a governing party in 2024, it will be shooting itself on the foot if it was to end even the 350 rands, which we call it insulting and paltry. So they've already made a concession that the 350 will be seen as an introduction of the basic income grant, something that Saftu and a host of working class formations have been championing and campaigning around. It is the cry of the excluded have been into the doorsteps of Parliament, as it was going to be doing on Thursday, and when the budget is delivered 2 weeks thereafter. It's a small progress, but what we're saying is this: 350 is insulting. 350 will not give you a bread every day for the full month. We need to increase that to 1,500 as soon as in the next budget that will be presented on the 23rd of February.
I mean, that's a great idea. I would love to see that happen. The proposal is that we could raise 100 billion rand a year by halting this profit shifting by transnational corporations. How do we do that to corporations? And let's face it, a lot of them have got very hefty profits, if you think of the fuel companies and if you think of some of the mining companies. But how do we halt this profit shifting concept so that we raise that money without putting off investors? Because we need investors.
What we're talking about here is actually an illegal act. It's criminality. It's corruption that we spoke about earlier on the part of the multinational corporation who are doing mispricing, who produce goods in South Africa and call a price on them. And yet when they sell the same goods all elsewhere in the world, they change the tax tag on that product so that they can dodge their responsibility to taxes in South Africa. So we're asking that the government must halt on that type of activity. The second one we are proposing is that government must introduce some kind of a tax on the 1% richest population that owns 90% of the wealth. And a small modest tax we have calculated through the research can introduce what we have called for ages, which Bishop Tutu died calling for: the wealth tax, the solidarity tax between the rich South Africans and the poor marginalized South Africans. And that introduction of that modest tax on the 1% we have calculated can bring another 140 billion rands in every year. And with 100 billion coming from the halting of the profit
profit shifting
strategy, and as well as the tax on the 1%, can bring an annualized 240 billion rands to the tax person every year. And we think that with that money, you can begin to roll out infrastructure for the first time in the rural areas to end this phenomenon where our children must cross crocodile-infected rivers on foot,
absolutely.
Where we can build infrastructure where the working people are residing, and where you can introduce the basic income grant in addition to that. And we believe that doing that will get people to have some disposable incomes in their hands, and they will begin to buy goods and services, and that's how you will grow the economy. You can never grow the economy where the majority of your people are so poor that they can't even buy chippies every day.
You do make an excellent point, Zwelinzima Vavi, and you're right that everyone needs to have some spending power. And this tension between the very few wealthy people and the majority of people who have so very little cannot continue. Something must be done. Perhaps this is something government will look at more seriously. Thank you so much for chatting to us, Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. And of course, on Thursday, they will be protesting outside Parliament, calling for more policies that consider the very poor. Stay with us, plenty more still to come.